Welcome to The Joyful Frugalista, the podcast that's all about living a richer life with less. I'm your host, Serina Bird, author and passionate frugalista. Each episode, we dive into inspiring stories, practical tips and joyful conversations that help you create abundance, embrace mindful spending, and live your best life, all without breaking the bank. So grab a cuppa, get comfy, and let's explore how being a frugalista can lead to freedom, happiness, and a whole lot of joy. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Please consult a qualified professional before making financial decisions. Hello, frugalistas, and welcome. Today I have a very special guest, and actually this guest today is someone who used to be my boss. It's not a typical savings and investing story, although he does actually have a financial background, but we're not going to talk about that today. But I've invited him on the podcast because his book is more gripping than a Tom Clancy novel. I kid you not. And it also happens to be true. Grant Dooley had a distinguished career as a diplomat in the Australian government, working with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where he served as Australian Consul General in Guangzhou, as well as postings to Shanghai and Jakarta, Indonesia. He's gone on now to have a successful career in finance and as a fund manager and a private investor. But it's his time on posting to Jakarta that we're going to really have a deep dive into today. Bomb season in Jakarta, personal account of a turbulent period in Australian diplomacy. It's a bit of an understatement, the title, actually, Grant. It was a very turbulent time.
Yeah.
It tells the story of his and his wife's dual postings to Jakarta in the early to the mid-2000s, where there were interesting times, shall we say. So welcome, Grant, and congratulations on having your book published. It's very much a from the heart book. So thank you so much for writing and sharing with us, with my listeners today.
Not a problem. More than happy to be here, Serena. It's good to reconnect again after all these years as well.
I know. And so this book writing process, how did this come about? Was it therapeutic for you?
Yes, probably the most therapeutic thing I've done. So how it came about is, I went through this terrible set of events in Jakarta back in 2004 to 2007, which began with the bombing at the embassy on September the 9th, 2004, and then was quickly followed by the tsunami and then some other more personal things around personal bomb threat against our house. We were caught in a riot out the front of the embassy, various other things. And then it all culminated in 2.5 years later with a plane crash, and I was supposed to be on the plane and decided to this day, it was a feeling in my stomach the day before. I just thought I was supposed to fly to Jakarta. Alexander Downer was visiting Indonesia for a counter-terrorism conference, and he was then going to go on to Jakarta, which is the cultural beating heart of Indonesia, to really open a university that had been rebuilt after an earthquake with Australian aid money, and I was in charge of that leg of the visit. And I was flying out the first plane out the next morning, and he was going to fly in later that morning, and I thought, well, that's enough time for me to make sure all the arrangements are in place. But something in my mind and in my stomach the day before at the conference, I thought, you know what, I better go today just in case everything's in place, because I would hate for things not to be in place. So I changed my flight, and I ran into a good friend as I was leaving, Morgan Mellish, who was very keen on to get on that first flight. And when I told him, he then rang his staff and got on that flight. Do I know if it was actually him if he got my exact seat? I don't know, but unfortunately he perished on a plane, and that hit me very hard. So that's the sum total of that 2.5, nearly 3 years, which is what the book is about. And as to why I wrote it, I buried all that stuff, as you do. I had a career. I didn't want to be a victim. I wanted to show that I was able to cope, that I was worried that if I went back to Canberra, then I'd be put in a too hard basket and I would have a career, which I did very well. I buried it, and I buried it pretty deeply, because it stayed buried until about 2019. And by that stage, I'm in finance, I'm in Singapore, I'm setting up a fund. It's a pretty stressful time. I had a lot of Chinese investors who were quite demanding. And then one night, I had this huge panic attack, and thought I was having a heart attack, actually. Once I was able to get control of my body, I thought I'd better go to see someone about it. I lost my sleep patterns. The person I went and spoke to as a psychologist said, look, when I told him the story of my background, he said, look, you've got PTSD, undiagnosed, and you really need to start dealing with it. You just can't bury it. You need to really start talking about it. I couldn't really talk about it, particularly the plane crash, and he recommended journalising. And at the same time, my son gave me a book called The Resilience Project, which also talks about the beneficial aspects of journalising trauma. So I just started writing these short stories. I wrote about the bombing, then I wrote about the tsunami, then I wrote about the plane crash, and my wife, actually Kristen, who's features quite heavily in the book, recommended that I start stitching these stories together into a novel, like a memoir, which I did. And probably the only other major change after that is I then turned it all from being looking back into a present tense memoir. So I didn't think I could give the reader a real sense of what I felt unless I wrote it in the present tense. It actually reads like a novel more than a traditional memoir where you look back in time.
Well, it does. And it's really, I guess, like a novel or like a mini-series, like things move very quickly with it. Like we're seeing it through your eyes. And it's not like, I guess, a traditional memoir where a lot of things lead up to one event. Like you're only a couple of chapters in and already like, bang, you've got the bombing.
Yeah, well, it happened. I actually hadn't even. So just to clarify, I'm a China expert who found himself in Indonesia. The rest of my career, I did China, except for this small period. And the reason I was in Jakarta was my wife, who was in the embassy. She actually got posted to the embassy, so I was the attached spouse. I was not supposed to be working. I enjoyed
shopping
trips, and laying by the pool in sarongs. That was I think she was getting a bit worried that she needed to find me a job. And look, I knew when I went there, it's our biggest embassy in the world, which does surprise people, Jakarta. The nature of the relationship means that it's so multifaceted. So I kind of knew that opportunities might come up. And when the opportunity came up as the first Secretary Economic, I was able to put together a good case as to why I'd be suitable for the job. And on the day of the actual bombing, I was actually on language training at that time. So I hadn't actually even formally started my role. We'd been there about 4 months. I hadn't been there that long. But from the very moment we arrived, I think we were a bit naive when we thought, we're going to Jakarta. There's been a couple of bombings, but, what's going to happen to us? I think we were blissfully naive. And then when we arrived, very quickly, the ubiquitous bomb checks everywhere you went, your car, your personal body, and then just the way people talked about it, and you could just feel it, very quickly. The sense of heightened anxiety about the situation became very palpable.
So just to put it back into context for my listeners who may have forgotten that period in history. So you were there, from 2004? So it's post-September 11 and it's post also the Bali bombings, which were terrible. So there's still a lot of things happening in Indonesia, and there's a lot of Islamist extremist groups who really have it out for Australia.
Yeah. Actually, do you mind if I just take my headphones off for 1 minute and get a copy of the book? Because it explains what I'm about to say. And I just realised I think it shows it backwards. But you can see bomb season in Jakarta. While I'm showing, that's the picture of the actual embassy bombing.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how big it was. And the reason I call it bomb season, and this goes to your point, is that we had the Bali bombing in October of 2022. We had the Marriott bombing of August 23. And then we had the bombing at the embassy in September 2004. So people were talking about, by the next year, what are you doing for bomb season? I'm going to go to Bali. I might go back to Australia for a few weeks. So it became part of the vernacular of the embassy was bomb season. The dark humour around that. I mean, so when we arrived into this really quite a tinderbox type situation, but it's our biggest embassy. It's
with
exciting.
Young children, I should add too.
No, with my 2 kids, yeah, that's right. And that's what I mean. I think we're a bit naive, just a bit naive. But I think we're also, again, good context here. I'm ex-Navy, 16 years in the Navy. My wife was in the Navy. We were kind of, I don't say we're used to being in these situations, but we had quite a slightly different, probably, view on this compared to maybe people who hadn't been in the forces. And we trusted that that we had, very good security arrangements in place. I mean, it was quite an intense. I mean, every day. Well, not every day. Every week you had a radio set in your. I don't write about this in the book. You had a radio set in your bedroom. You had to do radio checks. You had a panic room in your bedroom. So the idea being, if there's a riot or if something goes bad, you lock yourself in the panic room, got your two-way radio, and you have food in there, and you just hold out until such time as they come and get you, to rescue you. So. And you had barbed wire around the perimeter of your house. You had personal bodyguards. So it was a full-on experience, which until you got there, you really didn't quite. It didn't really cut. You couldn't process it. So very quickly, we became very aware that we were living in this environment, and just was it on the Saturday before the bombing, we had the Australian Embassy ball, and no hotel in Jakarta would host it because of the heightened security environment. So we actually had to have the ball on the tennis courts at the embassy. And of course, 5 days later we get bombed. So it was quite a weird situation, very heightened situation that we went into. But we did go in there with our eyes wide open, and I think we're just slightly a bit naive.
I love that, you're telling of this, that in high threat situations there's still that humour. And you tell a story particular about people going out for sandwiches. You had a bit of a roster at a time where things were very heightened in terms of the alerts.
The bridge of death. Yeah, this is the black... I mean, people say, how'd you get through it? I said, we got through it because we had resilience. I think my wife and I, and my kids, but people who did, not just us, but their friends and other people in the embassy were quite resilient. You get bombing, you get the tsunami, and you're still there. No one went home. Everyone stayed. So we had resilience. We had very strong network within the local community, and the Jakarta Bintang's AFL club was a very important circuit breaker for me. I could go out and play football and train, and take my head and totally forget about all this stuff. So we had a great community in the embassy, great community in the local expat community, and then we had black humour. And the black humour, you didn't realise how black it was until the point you're talking about is they'd found a website, they being the Indonesian intelligence authorities and the Australian Federal Police, who have an extremely good working relationship. They found a website set up by Jamaah, which was the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Indonesia that had perpetrated both the bombings in Bali and the embassy. And the website literally was the best places to assassinate Australian diplomats. And it was quite obvious.
Wow, that's very personal.
They had been following us, they knew where we went to eat, they knew where we went to drink, they knew where we went. So very quickly we were told, don't go to those places, don't do this, don't do that. And that was fine, and I'm glad that they gave us that heads up. And then they said later that they'd shut the website down and they didn't think there was any likelihood of us being assassinated. But still, one of those places that was identified was the bridge that connected the walkway, actually, from across Rasuna Syed, which is the main road out the front of the embassy. And you had to go across that bridge to get your sandwiches every day, which is the best cafe within walking distance of the embassy. And even at the height of all this, you couldn't stop us having our sandwiches. So we drew up a roster, the Bridge of Death roster, and you're rostered on to go and get the sandwiches. And every day, whoever's rostered on would go downstairs, would all crowd out the windows and watch the person go over the bridge and come back with the sandwiches. We'd all cheer, and we had the embassy had organised with the police to have a plainclothes policeman on the bridge, so that gave us some level of safety. But still, I mean, how important are the sandwiches, you could ask, as my daughter did after she read the book. Dad, it's a sandwich. But, you kind of want to try to live this normal life, even though you're in this situation. And the black humour, the people, the quality of the people, friends to this day, that live through that together.
Yeah, it sounds like you were very tight. And one of the things that comes through really clearly in your book is the professionalism of the DFAT staff on posting.
Yeah, and not just the DFAT staff. We had over 400 people in the embassy, of which 170 odd were Australian staff, and they were from a variety of agencies: defence, police, obviously DFAT, immigration. We even had a person from the National Library of Australia. Go figure. So you had a variety of staff who all showed the same level of commitment and discipline and resilience. And then, of course, we had these wonderful locally engaged staff, LE, some of who had been in the embassy a while and still are in the embassy. Really, the thing that really drove home to me just how special these people were is that on the Monday after the bombing, they all still turned up for work. These people are just local Indonesians who give their time and effort and sacrifice. And unfortunately, as I say in the bombing, the only people that died were Indonesians, and a couple of those were people working for the embassy. And really I think in this story, what I try to portray is hopefully the reader understand is that A, I've got great admiration for these people, and B, that Indonesia is an amazing place, and the one thing I didn't want the reader to get was a sense that I didn't like it or Indonesia's bad. That's not the story. The story is the Indonesian people are wonderful. The country is an amazing country, and I've been back since, but there is this element that obviously for ideological reasons have had it in for Australia.
Some of your stories you tell about some of the side visits you did, like obviously you've got all this security situation and everything you needed to do carefully, but a visit to an amazing gold mining site, like way up in a very remote location. I mean, that was just fascinating. For instance, your time in Jakarta, just some amazing trips, and of course all your Bali trips in between all of this as well.
Yeah, the one thing about being a diplomat, and you've done it, Serina, so I'm speaking to the converted, is it, or to those that are knowledgeable, it's part of your job. It's not just the capital city. Your responsibilities will extend into the countryside, and I was fortunate that my responsibilities included the mining sector, which meant, and there was a very big issue at the time around the changes to the mining law, and Australian-owned mines were very worried about what this might mean for their operations. So to get a greater understanding of what the mining sector and how they viewed these things, I was invited to mine up in the hills of Halmahera in northeastern, way far off, isolated Indonesia, and called Gosowong. And to get there involved a plane and a helicopter and various other things, and it just really, it was an amazing trip, and to stay there and meet the people, but also then, which I recount in the story, that how complex it is to not only to mine these minerals in these places. So the operations themselves are unbelievable. But then how do you get the gold, or it was a gold mine, out of the mine? And,
yeah.
So the operations of Gosowong, how it works with the local communities and how they've been able to win the trust of the local communities, and how this is very important during periods of unrest, and particularly in the late 1990s when the Christian and Muslim communities in that part of the world actually went to war against each other nearly. So it really gave you an insight into this. One thing I talk about a lot in the book is Indonesia is so complex, so contradictory. You've got the very large Muslim population, but substantive Christian population, 200 odd million people, of which 15% is Christian. So you can do the math. It's a big number, millions of people. So it was really good to get out there and see Indonesia outside of just being in Jakarta. And and the other thing, one of the trips I'll talk about, which is probably the sweetest thing I did, was to go and open a water facility just outside Yogyakarta, and the embassy had funded that facility for 2,000 to bring running water to this village, which had never had running water for 2,000.
Amazing.
Yeah, and the people who I talk about this lovely old lady who's in tears at the end, comes up to me and thanks me. So to see how you can make such an impact for so little money. And really, that's the other story. They're not hating Australia. They're very, obviously, we're doing wonderful things. So it was always great to get out of Jakarta, just so you could see the real Indonesia, not just the Bajurian, as they call it.
Oh, fabulous. And so we've had 2004 we started with. So it started with a bang, with the bombing, when you weren't even working yet, but you ended up working at that point, supposed to be on language training, and things happened. And I'm not going to spoil your response and what happened there. People are going to have to read the book. There's a lot of very personal things that Grant has shared in there about his response. And so you've had a whole lot of things happening there. And then Christmas comes, and a lot of people go home because, it's Christmas, they want to see family, and a lot of people have been under heightened stress. But you and your wife remain, and you're hoping it's going to be a quiet time, but it's not.
Yeah, well, because we newly arrived, the people who had been there longer were given time to go home. So we were a very small skeleton crew, because we'd had a lot of people go through this traumatic experience of the bombing. So the ambassador was very keen to give everyone time off, and obviously Christmas is a pretty quiet area from an Australian perspective. Usually, so we had a dinner the night before. Then on Boxing Day, as it is, it's the cricket, and a few of us that were still in Jakarta, we got together to watch the first day of the cricket, and of course, as we sat down and were watching the cricket, our phones started to go, and we had very patchy reports of a tsunami that had hit Thailand, and we had nothing yet in Indonesia. We weren't quite sure what that all meant. And then basically on BBC News, we turned it on and they said, well, epicenter is just off the coast of Aceh. And as soon as they said that, we went, well, why aren't we hearing anything from Aceh? And the answer became increasingly obvious, because it was actually decimated. There was no communications. Totally, the earthquake itself had done so much damage, and then on top of that, you had a resultant tsunami, which then washed ashore and went 4 or 5 kilometres inland in certain parts of
4 to 5 kilometres inland.
Yeah. What stopped it in some parts was just the mountain range. It just hit the mountain range, and it just flattened. There's some pictures in the book which I took from when I went up to Aceh a couple months after that. I took out the plane, where you see even 4 months later, it's just still flattened. So you have to think of the horror as people literally ran for their lives. And at the height, I think the highest point was 25 meters high at this wall of water, 25 meters high coming across. So that was that then consumed my wife Kristen's and my life for the next about 3.5 months. We worked every day, weekends included, with the Australian government response to the tsunami, and it was a huge response. And it's one thing I do like to, when people ask me about the nature of the Australian relationship now, could it happen again, the bombing? And I say, well, yes, things could always be another bombing. I wouldn't, obviously, but what gives us great cause for hope is that the bombings that happened at Bali, the embassy, and then the Australian government's response to the tsunami, and the Australian people's response to the tsunami with the outpouring of compassion and support, really recalibrated the Australian-Indonesia bilateral relationship. And we now have this relationship where the Australian Federal Police and their counterparts in Indonesia on the counter-terrorism side is so strong, and we have this great appreciation of Indonesia, and in Indonesia, a great appreciation of the compassion of the Australian people, which means there's like a ballast in the relationship now that can actually, and we've seen it, the relationship is a lot more solid. It's been able to ride out a lot more, we're not like we were in 1999 at the height of East Timor, for instance. So really the relationship is a lot more solid. You've got the ballast, you've got a great more understanding and appreciation, I think, from both sides.
And how significant was Australia's contribution to that?
Well, it was $1 billion. To this day, I don't know when that decision was made, but when the Prime Minister Howard arrived, and this is less than a week, I think, after the tsunami, and no, it'd be more than that. It would have been probably about a week and a half. And the skeleton crew, of which I was still one, was still swamped, and I was given the role of accompanying and putting together the visit for John Howard to go and meet both the President, Yudhoyono, but also attend a donors conference that the Indonesians had set up, and we had everyone from Kofi Annan to the head of the UN through to Colin Powell, the Secretary of State for the United States, Wen Jiabao, the Premier of China. It was a very high-level meeting, and so the Prime Minister and Mr. Downer came up for that. And when the Prime Minister met Yudhoyono at the Istana, the palace, he announced this $1 billion commitment to helping Indonesia rebuild its country. And to this day, one of the greatest things I've ever done was I was actually standing quite close. I got goosebumps as I talk about it, and you could see Yudhoyono got very emotional about that. And I think as a statement of our commitment to helping Indonesia, it was both politically a great message, because it was, you need to understand in this context, up until these things, Indonesians really didn't like us after Timor, and there was still a lot of suspicion and anger towards Australia over what happened in East Timor in late 1999. So politically, it was unbelievably good in that context to reset that relationship as a statement of good faith. And then just morally, it was the right thing to do, because this country had been devastated. It just really, politically and morally, was the right decision, and it was super well received.
And there was a lot of work that had to go into the rebuilding.
Yeah, I've not been back to Aceh since, but when I went there in the May with the parliamentary delegation, it was totally, it was still even, I think for years I would have thought, we're talking here total devastation. And not just from the tsunami, even because there's such a strong earthquake. Areas that weren't hit by the tsunami were devastated. So I've got no doubt now, we're talking here 20 odd years later, that things have obviously been largely rebuilt, but this was from scratch. I describe in a book that it looked like a World War II battlefield. You got a single palm tree and just, houses just demolished everywhere.
And in the midst of all of this, I can't remember whether it was you or your wife was dealing with another sort of almost left of centre kind of environmental issue as well. The zoo.
I can't give all the stories. Yeah. So that kind of, I mean, and I wrote about that. And people need to understand, when I wrote the book, I never wrote it to be published. I was just writing it to, and that was one of the funny stories. Like, I was thinking, well, in addition to all this mayhem, there are a couple of things that were quite, uniquely diplomatic type issues that probably diplomats never probably really talk about. Maybe, I don't know. But what you're referring to is, yes, the phone call. I got one, I think it was in February, and there was a lady from Australia Zoo who I thought was one of my colleagues playing a prank on me, saying that we need your help to get a shipment of very important produce into Aceh, and I kind of went, right and hung up. And then the phone goes again. It was from the minister's office saying that Steve Irwin had rung Alexander Downer, and it would be really good if I could help Australia Zoo with their very important cargo getting into Aceh. And we'd prioritised humanitarian aid, and this one was not quite, didn't fit that bill. It was elephant suppositories for all the elephants who need, which is, I feel for the elephants, but it was one of the more crazier type requests you get in the height of all this craziness to help a cargo of elephant suppositories get landed.
I guess it shows that the natural environment was really affected and the habitat was affected, and then obviously animals were affected as well.
Yeah. So, and we do love our elephants, but yeah, it was a bit like out of left field though, totally.
Amazing. So now I actually have one final question for you, and I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. There is so much in your book to talk about, and there's so many personal things in there. As you said, you don't want to share all of your stories on the podcast. People need to read the book and, buy the book and really read it, and there's a lot in there. But finally, do you have a frugalista tip?
You warned me that I have to think up something like this. Well, my frugalista tip is, and I've got 5 kids, so I've used this a lot, and that is really only spend your money on the things you really truly need, not what you think you may want. And I've got a daughter, particularly my youngest princess, who wants a lot. And I keep saying, do you really need that 2nd, 3rd, 15th pair of shoes or jeans or whatever she's wanting to buy? Finally, she always says, yes, I do, Dad. Now she's 18 and she works in a shop and she has her own money. She only buys what she needs.
So it's rubbing off. Yeah, kids are great for that. One of my children is what we call a manifester. He has a lot of things he wants. The other child doesn't want for a lot, but the younger one, people sort of give it to him, which is just amazing. I don't know, because he's really cute. People just give him stuff.
Should work in sales maybe as he gets older.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. Anyway, Grant, it's just been such a delight reconnecting with you and reading your book. You had mentioned parts of these things when we worked together. This is the book, Bomb Season in Jakarta, available in all good bookstores and online. And I'd heard certain things from other people as well, but you were always very humble about your role in Jakarta and indeed throughout your diplomatic career. But this is the real deal. So, I was in the department at the time, and so I can say with certainty, this is not fluff, it's not made up. This tells it how it is for working diplomats.
The best review I actually had is from a person who's in the book, my old boss, Michelle Chan. She sent me a text after she read it, and she said it's insightful, it's moving, it's raw, and drop dead funny in places. So there you go.
Aussie humour, love it.
Yeah, Aussie humour. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and all the best.
No worries. Cheers. Thanks, Serina. Bye.